this lesson, we'll finish creating the object material. Let's begin. Before we put the finishing touches on our material, let's make sure that we have our file set up and ready. First, we need to switch to the shading workspace found up here. And then make sure that you have this top right viewport set to the rendered mode by clicking this far right button. Now let's discuss what we'll be adding in this lesson. We've got 4 new effects to add to our material that will help make it look even better. First, we'll break up some of the most obvious repeating patterns in our material. Next, we'll add some distortion to the panel lines so they aren't quite so perfect and straight. After that, we'll add a darkening effect to the material so that it gets darker the further it is from the camera. Lastly, we'll remove this darkening effect, but only from the top surfaces of the models to retain the natural highlights. We'll start the lesson with one of the easier effects. Let's zoom into the area above the very first image down here, the one called ambient occlusion. Now we can add 3 new nodes by hitting Shift and A, going to Search, and first we'll add a noise texture, so NOI, and then we're going to choose Noise Texture, the first option. We can place that up here to the top left, then hit Shift and A, Search, type in Color Ramp, COLOR, Color Ramp, place that here, and then lastly we'll hit Shift and A, Search, type in Mix, Color, and then we'll choose that here, and place it to the right. Before we connect these nodes to our system, let's talk about what we plan to use them for. Our goal is to overlay a random noise texture on top of the ambient occlusion texture image to help break up what I like to call the sunglasses pattern. So we can see that here, just by zooming in, we can see this sort of sunglasses shaped pattern, and it's repeated all over the scene. We can see it just going straight down the line all the way over and over again. There's a couple other repeating patterns, but this one in particular is really noticeable, mostly because, in my opinion, I think it looks like a pair of sunglasses. If we can break up the look of just this shape, it'll make a big difference in the look of the overall material. Now that we know what we're doing, let's start hooking up the new nodes. First, we need to make room for them by selecting the nodes on the right and moving them even further right. So we're going to drag select over all of these nodes, including the 2 yellow mixed nodes. So everything here. And we're just going to drag these over to the right side. About here should be good. Now we can zoom into the nodes that we added here at the top. We're going to drag this mix node down here, and then we can just drag these 2 nodes until they're about lined up with the ones below. Right around here is fine. Now let's get everything connected. So we're going to drag from this vector socket here to the vector on this noise texture. Then we can drag from this factor socket here, the top one on the noise texture, down to this factor socket on the bottom of the color ramp. Then we're going to plug this color ramp socket, so this color socket here, into the factor socket for this mix node. So not either the A or B's, just this top one, the factor. Now this color ramp below, the one attached to the ambient occlusion image, we'll drag from color to the A socket here on the top. And then we're going to drag from the results of this down here, and we're going to replace the one that's currently plugged into the A so that it bypasses it. With the system set up, let's adjust each of these nodes to make it look better. We're going to start with the color ramp node, as it'll make all the other changes a bit more obvious. So let's zoom into the color ramp. We're going to switch it from linear to constant like we have been before. And then we're going to select this far right slider. So click on this little triangle, or just make sure it's set to 1 here on the left. And then we'll adjust this position to 0.85 and then hit enter. Just like the previous color ramps, we're using this node to remove the gray values from our texture and to limit it to just stark black and white patches. Now let's go over here to the left to this noise texture, and we're going to switch it from the FBM mode instead to the multi-fractal mode. This is just changing the type of noise. It'll change some of the sliders, and it also just changes how the noise looks. We can now see it's a little bit different pattern here on the wall. And now we can adjust these sliders down here at the bottom. So we'll set the scale to 2.9, the detail to 5, the roughness to 0.95, the lacunarity to 1.7, and then the distortion, we'll set this to 0.6. We changed pretty much every one of these settings on this noise texture, so it's quite a bit different than the default. In general, our changes affected the type of noise pattern generated by the node, which was this drop down here, the size and the smoothness of this pattern, and then lastly, we added a little bit of a distortion to make it swirl slightly, just so it's a little bit more organic. You can see the results of these changes with the splotchy light gray pattern here found on the wall. You also notice that it's laying on top of this sunglasses pattern. So we can see here, the sunglasses pattern now has this splotchy pattern laying on top of it, helping to break it up. And each of these sunglasses is changed in different ways. Some of them aren't covered as much, some are covered more, some are almost entirely removed. It's helping break up this repeating pattern by covering up random parts of the image and making it a lot more organic. And then lastly, we need to go over here to this mix color node that we added. And then the only change that we need to make is going down here to the B socket. We're going to click on this color bar, and then we're just going to make this pure white. So we can do that with this value slider by just dragging it all the way over here to the right until it's set to 1. By doing this, we're telling the light gray pattern that we saw before to instead be the same white color as the base material it's applied on top of. This means that the noise pattern is no longer seen and is instead acting as a mask for the underlying image. This method works because we plugged the noise texture, this pattern here, into the factor socket down here. The factor socket determines how the images are mixed together. So using an image as the factor, rather than a simple number, which is just the slider that's there by default, allows us to use a black and white image to make the mixing of the image a bit more complex. We're telling certain parts of the image to overlay at a full opacity, whereas other parts are overlaying at a 0 opacity. And that's it for this effect. So we're ready to move on to the next one. For this effect, we'll be adding a few nodes to distort the panel lines, making them a little bit less perfect. We can see an example of the panel lines here, and we can see just how straight and perfect they are. So we're going to try to break those up. Let's go down to our shader editor, and we're going to zoom out, and then go to this very bottom image named normal. So we'll be working on this image now. So let's add 2 new nodes. We'll hit Shift and A, go to search, type in noise, and then choose noise texture. Place that down here, and then again we'll hit Shift and A, go to search, and type in mix, and choose mix color, and then place that to the right. To make room for these new nodes, we're going to drag select over these 2 left nodes, so the mapping and the value, and we're just going to move those over here to the left, and then we can drag select over these 2 new nodes that we added here at the bottom, and we'll place them here in this gap. Let's get these connected together now. So we're going to drag this mix node and place it on top of this purple line until it turns white, and then we can let it go to let them connect each other. And then we're going to plug this factor socket here on this noise texture into the B socket here on the bottom. With everything connected, now we can adjust these new nodes. We'll start by adjusting this mix color node here on the right. So we're going to switch from mix mode instead to soft light found here at the top right. And then we're going to change this factor number down here to something really tiny as we want a really low influence. So we'll put 0.02 and then hit enter. These settings that we adjusted change how Blender is combining the noise texture we added down here in the bottom, as well as the mapping node here being routed into socket A. We're using this noise texture to warp the way that Blender combines these images based on the pattern of the noise texture. We don't want this effect to be too strong, however, which is why we lowered this factor number to something really tiny, in this case 0.02. Now let's make some adjustments over here to this noise texture. We're going to change the scale to 20 to make it much tinier. We'll set the roughness all the way up to 1, and then we'll change the distortion to 0.3. All we did with these settings is make the noise pattern a bit smaller and increase the distortion to add a bit more swirl to it. Now if we go up to our image here, we can zoom out. Then we can zoom in here to this slanted wall above these pipes. And we can see that these panel lines now have a bit more waviness and just a bit more character to them. They're not quite as perfect and straight, and it just helps the world feel a little bit more aged and have maybe a bit more of a worn down texture to it. And that's it for our second effect. Now let's move on to the distance darkening effect that I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson. This effect is going to be placed on the far right of our texture. So down here, we're going to zoom out, and then over here on the right side, this is where we'll be placing it. So first, let's make some room for it. We're going to select this far right node, the material output, and we're just going to drag it over here to the right to make some room. Now we need to add 4 brand new nodes. So first, we're going to hit Shift and A, go to search, and then search camera, C-A-M, and we're going to choose camera data found here at the top. We'll place that over here to the left. Now hit Shift and A, go to search, this time type in map, M-A-P, and we're going to choose map range, this third option. Then place that down here, 2 more left, so we'll hit Shift and A, search, we'll search color and choose color ramp, and then 1 more, Shift and A, search, type in mix, M-I-X, and choose mix color. And then place that here. Now let's get all of these nodes hooked up. So first we'll take this mix node that we just added and drag it here on top of this line to have it auto connect. Then let's zoom in down here, and we're going to connect view z depth down to the value found here on map range. Then we'll connect result down here into factor, and then we'll zoom out a bit and connect color from color ramp over here into the B socket. With everything hooked up, now we can start adjusting these nodes. But before we do that, let's go over here to our top right viewport and just zoom out so we can see the whole thing again in case you zoomed in like I did before. Okay, so we'll go down here and start with the mix color node. We're going to switch it from the mix mode to multiply instead, and then we're going to set this factor slider all the way to 1. Just like before, we've set this mode to multiply because we want Blender to only overlay the black parts of this new color ramp on top of the image. This will allow us to only darken the underlying material and ignore the lighter parts. Setting the factor to 1 allows us to use the full opacity of the black parts of the gradient to overlay on the underlying texture. Now let's zoom out and go down here to the bottom, and we'll see here we have the camera data node. In this case, there isn't anything to change. All we need to do is make sure that we're using the correct mode, in this case, view z depth. The view z depth mode allows us to tap into the camera data that shows how far away an object is based on its distance from the camera. The setting almost looks like a thick white fog across the scene, with distant objects being shown in white and close objects being shown in black. Now let's zoom in down here to this map range. We're only going to be changing one setting here, and it's this from max, the second slider. We're going to set this to 172.1 and then hit enter. In basic terms, this setting changes how far away Blender thinks the maximum distance is. This moves the fog that I spoke about earlier closer to the camera. And we can see that up here that our image got darker. And then lastly, we need to adjust these color ramp settings here to the right. So first we'll select this linear dropdown, and then instead switch it to B-spline, found here just below. And then first, we'll make sure that we have this left slider selected, so the black one. We're going to click this color bar at the bottom, and we're going to instead make this white. So we can go to the value and just drag it all the way over here to the right. Now we'll select this right slider by clicking this triangle or making sure that it's set to the 1 channel down here. We're going to set the position to 0.342. Hit enter, and then we need to change this color from white. So we're going to click on this bar at the bottom, and we're going to set this value to 0.025 and then hit enter. So you can see that we had quite a few changes for this node, so let's go over some of the things we changed. Adjusting the gradient type from linear to B-spline makes the gradient a lot more smooth. So in this case, the B-spline gradient type is just a more gradual, more smoothed out version of linear. We swapped the black and white slider positions to invert this gradient. So now it's white on the left side and black on the right side, instead of the original, which was black on the left and white on the right. This change inverts the color of the fog that we're overlaying across the scene, meaning that the distant objects are now darker and the closer objects are now lighter, which is the exact opposite of how it was before. We also lightened the black slider, so this far right one, to a really dark gray, so it's not quite as intense as before. We can now see with all these changes finalized that the distant objects, such as this column back here or this bridge or even the corner of this wall, are significantly darker than the objects in the front. This helps make them feel like they're being pushed back into the shadows, which further increases the contrast in our scene. Now we're ready for the last effect for this material. This time we're going to be using some nodes to remove this darkening effect that we just added only from the top surfaces of objects. This will help retain the highlights in the world and give it a bit more contrast. We're going to need quite a bit of nodes for this effect, so please bear with me as we get all these nodes laid out and connected. It's going to be a bit confusing to begin with, but I promise I'll explain what they all do before the end of the lesson. All of these new nodes are going to be on the far right side of the system, just like this distance darkening effect that we just added. Before we add anything new though, let's make some room for the new stuff. So we can zoom out a bit. We're going to drag select over these two far right nodes. We're going to move them way over here, just to make plenty of room. And then we're going to drag select over this distance darkening effect that we added down here, and just move them down a little bit because we're going to need a little bit of room here. Now we can add all 8 new nodes that we need for this effect. So we'll start out by adding nodes over here above this grouping of nodes. We're going to be adding these from left to right. So we'll hit Shift and A, search, type in geometry, G-E-O, and choose geometry. Place that over here, basically above this green node. Again, Shift and A, search, we'll type in separate color, S-E-P, and then choose separate color, Shift and A, search. We'll type in hue, H-U-E, and choose hue saturation value. Place that here, Again, Shift and A, search, type in invert, INV, we'll choose invert color, and then one more for this area, Shift and A, search, we'll type in color ramp, and then choose that and place it here to the right. We'll connect these new nodes here in a moment, but for now, let's get the last of the nodes created. So we'll hit Shift and A, search, mix, MIX, we'll choose mix color, place that down here, and then the last two, Shift and A, search, type in brightness, BRI, and choose brightness contrast, place that down here, and then one more, Shift and A, search, we'll type in INV, and choose invert color again, and then place that here to the right. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but it'll make more sense soon, I promise. Now let's go through and connect all these new nodes together. So we're going to start here at the top, we'll zoom in, we're going to connect from normal down here into color, then from blue into color, color into color, and then color into factor. Now let's zoom out a bit so we can see these nodes. We're going to connect from color here, the top socket on this color ramp, down into A. We're going to plug the result of this mix node down here into the factor on this very last mix color node. And then over here on the left side, we're going to plug from color into color found here on the top, and then color to color, and then finally color to B. So now let me zoom out again just to show you everything that's lined up. So we have all these nodes connected here, then this is connected down here into this mix color that we added, and then we have these two nodes connected to this color ramp, and then finally this mix color is plugged down here into the factor for this last mix color. Okay, so now we're ready to make adjustments to all of these nodes and get the effect that we're looking for. Much of this effect might not be obvious until all of the nodes are changed, but I'll explain what we're doing with each node and why it's important to the overall effect. We're going to start with this small grouping of two nodes down here at the bottom. Let's zoom in down here. So first we're going to change this bright value here to 1.83, and then we'll change the contrast to 5. We don't need to make any adjustments here to the invert color. So this brightness contrast node does exactly what it sounds like. We're brightening and increasing the contrast between the black and white on the Z depth nodes that we added below, which are these. So we're making it brighter, but we're also increasing its contrast. We also ran this new branch, this here, through an invert color node found here on the right to swap the black and white on the image. This means that for this particular version of the Z depth, we changed it back to the distant objects being white and the close objects being black. This is referring to that fog that we talked about earlier. This will be important later on. Now let's go over here to the new mix color node that we added. And we're going to change this from mix to screen instead, which is found here. And then lastly, we'll set the factor all the way to 1. These adjustments tell Blender to only overlay the white parts of the image on the underlying texture. This is the opposite of the multiply mode that we've been using before, which only overlays the black. The factor slider set to 1, just make sure that the white parts we're overlaying are fully opaque. Okay, so now for the real magic of this effect. We're ready to start adjusting this large group of nodes that we added up here at the top. We'll start over here on the left side with the geometry node. There's nothing to adjust here other than noting that we use the normal mode on this geometry node. Let's give you a better look at what this normal mode actually looks like, so you can understand why each of these following nodes here are needed. You don't need to follow along with this step. This is just meant for me to show you as an example. You can just watch for now. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and then click over here twice so that I can see what this normal mode looks like. We can now see over here that in our right viewport, the material has been converted into black, red, blue, and green. These colors correspond to the individual directions that each of these faces are pointing. In this example, all the faces pointing upward are shown in blue. We can see an example of that here on top of this bridge. So the very top of the bridge is pointing up, which means it's blue. These blue areas will be very useful for us in isolating only the upward facing parts of the objects, allowing us to selectively brighten just these parts. We can also see a good example of that over here on the tops of these pipes. Now I'm going to go back down here and set my texture back to how it was. Now we can zoom back in on these nodes. Okay, so now that we understand the foundation for these nodes, let's get these settings finalized. So for the separate color node, again, there's nothing here to change, but we should better understand what this node is actually doing. We plugged the normal image over here that we just discussed into this node, and then separated these colors and chose to only display the blue color by plugging it in over here to this hue, saturation, and value node. This allowed us to isolate just the blue parts of that image. So we don't need the red or the green, we only need the blue. Now for the hue, saturation, value, all we're going to do here is drag this saturation all the way down to 0, making this blue instead into a light gray color. We're just removing all the saturation because we don't really need it to be blue, we just wanted those blue areas. Next we have this invert color node. Again, there's nothing to change here, but this node is flipping the colors for the image. The last time we saw that blue, green, red image, it was mostly black with small areas of color such as blue. Now that we've inverted it, the image is predominantly white and the old blue areas are a dark gray. This is important because our goal here is to use these nodes as a mask for the Z-depth darkening nodes below. For the mask to work as we want it, we need the areas that we want to remove from the Z-depth to be black, and the areas that we want to keep the Z-depth on to be shown in white, which is what this invert color has done for us. Next up, we have our color ramp found here. For this change, we're going to select this far left slider, then we'll go over here and set the position to 0.7, and then hit enter. All we need to do here is move this black slider to the right. This increases the amount of black in the gradient and makes the old blue areas slightly larger and gives them slightly sharper edges. As an example of this, if we zoom in on the top of this pipe here, we can see that as we slide this back and forth, we change how bright the top of this pipe is. We can also see that the gradient, this transition between the two, gets sharper the further right we move it. For our render, we're going to leave this set to 0.7 for the position. And that's it. The material and all of our bonus effects are finished. We can see the full result of that by zooming out here. We can also see the look of the entire system down here by zooming out. And then if you'd like, you can make this a little bit more compact by drag selecting over this group on the right side and just moving them a bit closer so it's not quite so spread out. We spread it out originally just to make room for stuff, but now that we know all the nodes are in place, you can start moving things back a little bit and just getting a little bit more tidy. I realize this material has been quite a lot of work, but it's really the soul of our render, so to speak. We have it applied to nearly every object in the scene, so it's worth spending some extra time on to get it looking really cool. The remaining material lesson won't be quite so long as well, as we learned a lot of the basics in these material lessons. I won't need to explain everything in quite so much detail because we'll have already used the same techniques while creating this main object material. We have just one more material to create before we move on. This one will be a good bit more simple too. In the next lesson, we'll create the background material. I'll see you there.